Morning, Rabbi.
Good, Barry.
Okay, so before we go on to the next sif, I just wanted to do something in Likutim, just very quickly to follow up on what we were discussing yesterday. We were discussing this whole idea of you are allowed to save your own property, even if it means damaging your neighbor's property, but only if that's the only way that you can save your property. And in the course of our discussion, we talked about nizke behema, different types of damage that animals do. And when we talk about animals, we usually talk about domesticated animals that you keep that live with you on the farm. And so the issue came up if you have a wild dog, and you know that dog is dangerous, is a known danger, then that could actually change the halachic category and make you liable each and every time that animal goes ahead and attacks somebody. Okay, and then just finally in the Likutim, it says shor chavero, when your friend's ox is attacking. There are other types of damage that can be performed against an animal. Hakovesh behemas chaveru b'mayim, that if you force an animal in the water and you force it to stay there, o shehinicha b'chama, or if you force an animal to remain out in the sun, it seems same aleha hamakom kedei shelo timtza tzel, and you force it to remain in that position. So that it can't find shade, ad shehargasa hachama, to the point where it dies because of exposure to the sun, or it dies because it can't stay in the water for that long. So the halacha is you're chayiv. You're going to be liable for damage that's caused to that animal, the loss of its life. B'davka im achsa biyada, but that's only if you physically restrain the animal there. Aval sagar aleha hadeles shelo teitze, yesh omrim depater medine adam. But if all you did was just to close a gate or to prevent the animal from being able to get to the exit, so you passively, in other words, you're not physically actively restraining the animal, but you're just preventing the animal from getting out. So then some would say that you're pater medine adam, even though you're chayiv b'dine shamayim. Misha behemto regila likanes listei chavero umazikasa. So another halacha, with this we'll conclude the sif, is that if an animal of my neighbor regularly comes onto my property and eats my azaleas, right, or does some other kind of damage, yachol bal hasad lahasros bebal habehema sheyishmor behemto. So then the injured party, the damaged party, can always go, should always tell the neighbor, hey, make sure your animal stays off my lawn. V'im lo shamru v'hizika chayav l'shalim. And if the neighbor does not heed the warning of the neighbor, then he can be sued in a beis din, and he'll have to pay. And ve'enu yachol omer lo gedor sadcha kedei shelo tikanes bo. He does not have the right to tell the neighbor. In other words, the person who owns the animal does not have the right to retort to the neighbor, well, my dog has a right to roam the neighborhood. You put a fence around your garden if you don't want my dog in there. That's not a legal argument, right? You can't say you should put a fence around your azaleas if you don't want my dog to eat them. No. Any person who owns an animal that roams onto private property is responsible for the damage that animal causes. Okay, that seems pretty reasonable. It seems fairly logical. Okay, so what I'd like to do now is go on to the halacha in Sifav, where we get into the din of a masur, of a person who informs to the government. Now, as we'll see, it's both in Sif Vav and in Sif Zayin. Let me just see if it goes on to Sif Ches. Yeah, yeah, it goes on to Sif Ches as well. So we're going to see for a few Sif in the din of a Masur. Um, and I just want to caution us that the laws of Masur, um, to a very large degree, applied in the ancient and medieval world, don't to a very large degree apply today. Now there is still application to the din of a Masur, that if you wantonly, without any reason, just try to get another Jew in trouble with the government, so then many poskim will still say that that's usher today, even if the person is doing something illegal. But if it's only a financial crime, then and it's none of your business, so then you would qualify as a masur by informing on him, unless you can ascertain that if this person continues to go unchecked, he's going to be doing something terrible. He's going to continue harming or bilking other people out of money. He's going to be cheating other people. But if there are no other repercussions other than he's not paying his taxes, so then you're not allowed to inform on him even today. But so I want us to keep that in mind, that many of these halachas are archaic and do not apply today. But let's take a look at the halacha, and then we'll see how we apply it. So the Rav Shulchan Aruch says, remember, the Rav Shulchan Aruch is living in the 18th century, where Jews are still treated as second-class citizens, where anti-Semitism is rampant, and there were many times when a Jew would implicate another Jew in order to raise his own station within society. Asr limsor Yisrael biad anas, ben gufo ben mamono. So the first thing is that you're not allowed to inform on a Jew so that he gets in trouble with someone who is in a position of power. Position of power isn't necessarily the government. It could be a land baron who the king gives permission to, the sheriff of Nottingham, right, is the classic example, like from the story of Robin Hood, where he just confiscates from the poor whatever they have. So you're not allowed to implicate another Jew and let this person of power know, hey, if you're looking for a little bit of extra money from the community, you should go to Yankel. He keeps the stash underneath his barn. So you're not allowed to inform on a Jew, bein gufo, bein mamono, and to either get the Jew in trouble physically or to get his finances in trouble or get them confiscated. Afilu mamon kal, and this is true even if it's just a small amount of, an insignificant amount of money that will get confiscated from him. Bein bedibor, lahalshin alav, and this is true that you're not allowed to use speech to inform on him, o legalos matspunav, or to reveal lahalshin alav, o legalot matspunav, or to reveal in any other way the things that he has hidden. Afilu ein ha'anas shoel ela tevin bilvad, even if the person who is of forceful authority is only asking, where does the guy keep his straw? Asr lomar sheyesh beveis Yisrael ploni. You're not allowed to say, oh, the Jew keeps it over there. Or if he's saying, where can I find some straw? And you can't point to a Jew's house and say you can find it there. Vein shemar lo be'etz b'tevin shel chavera. And so therefore, you can't say verbally expose your friend, even if you do it non-verbally, just by pointing a finger to so-and-so's farm. That's also not permitted. B'chol hamoser, and obviously you can see that this was a prevalent problem in the old days, that Jews would try to save themselves by getting other Jews in trouble because they were under such threat of, they were so terrorized, Jews in bygone eras, that they would do anything to try and save their skin. And that's why the halacha is structured in such a way that neither with speech or with non-verbally, just to point a finger. Like you can imagine, like in the movies where, the neighbor just doesn't want to say a word, so they just point their finger to so-and-so's house. V'chol hamoser ein lo chelek le'olam haba. And if a person does act as a moser, so then he loses his portion in the world to come. Va'afilu rasha ubal averos aser lebasro logufo v'lo. And even if a person is a bad guy, right? In other words, he's a ne'er-do-well in the Jewish community, and he does a lot of averos. You're still not allowed to inform on him, neither to get him in jail or in physical danger, or to have his money forfeited. Va'afilu hu neitzar lo umitzaru tamid bidvarim. And that's true. By the way, have I shared my screen? Can everyone see the screen or not? Just want to make sure. There, is that better?
Okay, yeah, now we can.
I'm sorry about that. No one said a word. Sorry. Okay. So even if the
personally, I'm an auditory learner, so so I can't speak. But
okay. So this is true, even if the person who's part of the Jewish community is constantly annoying to me, and he's mean to me, and he calls me names, and he makes my life miserable with his verbal assaults. I'm still not allowed to inform on him. The only exception would be aval in masro mutter lemosro. If, however, he informed on me to the government, I'm allowed to take action against him and inform on him in return. But only b'makom sheyesh chajash sheyachzor v'yimtzarenu. V'i efshar lahatzil atzmo ela im kein yimtzarenu. But only if the reason why I'm concerned is that he's informed on me in the past, and I'm worried he's going to continue to inform on me to the authorities. And the only way that I can protect myself from his finger pointing against me is to finger point against him. Or if he's already informed on me and the government is coming after me, and the only way to save myself from being unfairly unfairly pursued by the authorities is to point the finger back at him. So those would be circumstances when it would be permitted to get the government involved or some other powers that are in authority to get my friend in trouble. Another exception would be is if a person is not just verbally offensive, but let's say he's physically aggressive. So let's say he regularly beats people up in the community. These guys used to exist in the Jewish community before we had before there was a sense of a democratic police force in civilized countries, in modern countries. Jewish communities would sometimes have to suffer from their own guys who were the bullies in the neighborhood, who would put together like some kind of mafia, and they would go around and they would shake people down and try to extort money from them. And if they didn't pay them the money, they would beat them up. This was going on even in the early 20th century. So sometimes, if a guy is a mafioso, a mafia thug, but he's Jewish and he's part of the neighborhood, sometimes if the only way to save yourself from getting beaten up by his thugs is to surrender him to the authorities, that would be fine. Mitzvah kol adam lemosro le'arkos sheyikchu mamono. You are allowed to give up such a person to the secular authorities so that they confiscate his property. Or even if the penalty is that they end up chopping off his hand, which they used to do in some Muslim countries. If that's the only way to prevent him from assaulting people, so then you're allowed to do that. But that's only if the guy is a regular thug, that he's terrorizing the neighborhood. But if a guy just, I got into an altercation with him and he gave me a black eye, that's not enough of a justification for me to inform on him to the authorities. Asra afilu lamuka atzmo lemosra. Then even I, the one who was assaulted by him, am not allowed to give him up to the authorities. Afal pishim avaru masar yesh potrin b'dinei adam. He says, even though there are some who say that if a guy really beat me up, and I went ahead and I informed on him to the authorities to get him in trouble, I cannot be brought to Beis Din for that. Mishum she'ein adam nitfas al tzaro, because you can't take a person to task when he's feeling pain like that. Sometimes he'll do irrational things and will go overboard. So, I just was learning with my boys the story of Bar Kamsa on Tisha B'Av, and this was a story of a guy who was so offended by what the organized Jewish community had neglected to help him with, and he was so humiliated that he did something horrible, and he started the whole process of the Churban of the Second Temple by informing on the Jewish people and getting the Jewish community in trouble at the time of towards the end of the Second Temple. Now, essentially, what the Rav Shulchan Aruch is saying is that if a person is to the point where he is so humiliated, or if he feels that he was so beat up unjustly, and as a result he goes ahead and informs on someone to the authorities, some say that because he was so much in pain, we can't really take him to task for doing that. But certainly, lechatchila, he would not, if he was to ask a shaila, am I allowed to inform on the authorities? No, of course not. He still called him asur. Vafilu Yisrael alam she'eno rotzeh lavo ledinei Yisrael asur likbol alav lifnei hasar. And he goes even further. Let's say a Jew is conducting business in the community, and in my opinion, he's doing something wrong, and I want to take him to Beis Din, and he refuses to go to Beis Din. What recourse do I have? Can I immediately report him to the authorities and get him in trouble with the authorities? So I'm not allowed to complain to the authorities to force this guy to go to Beis Din, l'chuf u'lama l'dinei Yisrael, ad sheyitol reshus mi Beis Din. I have to first get permission from the Beis Din in order to be able to even report him to the authorities. It's only if a guy refuses to go to Beis Din, and then I ask Beis Din for permission to go to the secular authorities about this guy, will I be allowed to do so? Another example is that I can't, if a guy is ordered by Beis Din to pay and he refuses to pay, so I can't go to the secular court until I get permission from the Beis Din to take the Beis Din's order and use it as a collection device. In other words, I can't take the law into my own hands in order to get this fellow into financial trouble with the authorities because he hasn't paid me what he owes me. I can only do it once Beis Din gives me permission. Now, typically, when a person goes to Beis Din, he has to sign a letter of binding arbitration, an agreement of binding arbitration. And that agreement of binding arbitration is sufficient in and of itself, if I prevail in Beis Din, to use it as a document of collection in any secular court in Canada, the United States, in a secular court of law. I can use the arbitration agreement to collect on what the guy owes me. But in the olden days, a guy would go to take a guy to Beis Din. The guy either would not show up or he would show up and he would just poo-poo the whole thing. You'd have to wait for the Beis Din to actually give me a permission to go and report him to the authorities. I can't do that independently. That's the point of the Rav Shulchan. So we've seen a number of things over here in this halacha about the prohibition of reporting someone to the authorities, even if it's only to save your own skin. And the only exceptions that we've seen that you are allowed to report a person to the authorities is if this person is getting other Jews in trouble, or if this person is assaulting other Jews. Okay, so then those are the only exceptions that we have. But under normal circumstances, you're never allowed to get another Jew in trouble with the authorities, even if it's to be able to recoup what he's done to you. And the only time that you would be allowed to do so is if you get express permission from the Beis Din to allow you to do that. Okay. Now let's start the Imrei Yaakov. There's a lot of qualifications that I think we're going to be seeing about this halacha in general, and we have to know, that it's not always across the board. Okay, so let's take a look. Bain mamono. You're not allowed to inform on someone to get either them physically in trouble, like put in prison, or to get their money confiscated. Okay, so hamoser mamon bidei anas, bein anas akum, bein anas Yisrael, chayav l'shalem mehaidish shebenechasav kol ma shelokach anas kedin mazik. So he says, if Shimon goes ahead and informs on Reuven, and as a result of informing on Reuven, ends up getting Reuven's property confiscated, it doesn't matter whether the person confiscating them was a mafia thug, Jewish or non-Jewish. So then Shimon has to pay he has to pay damages. And the halach of paying damages is that when I damage someone's property, I have to pay from the highest quality real estate that I own, just like the din of any mazik. V'hainu k'mishem mishalem bekarkos, aval im mishalem metaltalin, yachol l'shalem afilu subin d'chol mili meitav ninu. We're talking about when Shimon is paying from real estate, but if he's paying from chattel, he can use any chattel to pay back. V'afal pi shelo nasa hamoser v'lo nasan biyado, elahera odiber la'anas v'goram shenimser mamonu shel zeh la'anas. And this is true even though it's only a grama, because we learned that by normal cases of grama, it's causative, through a word or through just not watching an animal properly, the animal goes ahead and is injured or damaged or something like that. So sometimes I'm not going to be held liable for damage. But when it comes to Masira, even by just pointing a finger to let the person in authority know where he can confiscate this person's property, it makes me into a mazik, and I can be taken to Beis Din, and Beis Din will compel me to pay. Ketzah. Let's give an illustration. Haresh Gozar Hamelech. So if the king makes a decree, and Hainu be'inyan she'in bo dina de malchusa, kagon she'gozar al ish yadua ba'ayin siman zayin sif yutes. So if you recall, we said that dina de malchusa dina applies when a law is applied universally and fairly across the board. Then you have to abide by the law of the land, and you're not allowed to evade the law. But we're not talking about that. We're talking about a king or some person in authority who has decreed upon one individual lahavi lo yayin o tevenu chedoma, that he wants a certain community to bring him wine or straw or some other commodity. Va'amad moser Ba'amar hare yesh leploni otzer yayin oteven b'makom ploni. And so the master guy goes ahead and says, oh, I know Yankel has wine, or he has straw, or he has this commodity, he has it hidden away. So the emissaries of the king go, and they just wantonly confiscate it. So that's sort of like the classic case of a maser. And if you cause this guy's property to be confiscated unfairly, not based on any fair taxation, but just because it's the sheriff of Nottingham, so you're going to have, or let's say the guy's a mafia thug, so then and the guy is out now of this commodity, so the person who informed on him is going to have to pay. The isha shemasra mishamtinan law, and if a woman does it, women normally in, again, medieval society were reliant, completely dependent upon their husbands. They didn't have their own assets to speak of. So you can't collect anything from her, but you could put her under a ban, religious ban from the community. And if she does have independent funds that her husband has no control over, so that can be taken from her. But that's only if the person voluntarily gave up the information. The moser voluntarily gave up the information. But let's say he was one of these mafia thugs, grabs him, pins him against the wall with a pair of brass knuckles and says, tell me where I can find wine in this village. And the guy is terrified of getting beaten up or worse, and he ends up telling the thug where he can find wine. So then he could not be sued to pay for the wine that he caused me to lose. Furthermore, if a person was told by a thug to surrender a certain commodity, and in the course of surrendering his own commodity, he ends up surrendering his friend's commodity as well, he can be held liable for the loss that his friend incurs. High time and nifsak b'shulchan aruch so simin shinayin aleph dim anas hamelech es hagazlan v'amar lo harei lanu es kol ma sheyesh lecha. So therefore, if the sheriff of Nottingham goes over to a guy who's a thief and he says, show me what you have, show me everything that you own, and the Goslin goes ahead and shows the king a field that he had stolen from somebody else. So in that situation, the guy who was both now a Goslin and a Moser will be liable to make restitution to the person that he stole the field from. Mishum de Pasha bazeh sheher lo gam es zu shegazal. Kevin de hamelach lo anso elo laharos es shalo vizu lo shalo he. He says, because the fact that the guy is, yes, it's true, he felt compelled to give up his own property, but he didn't have to give up the property that he had stolen. And even if a person was compelled, but he physically surrendered items that didn't belong to him, he's going to have to make restitution. So in other words, we said before that if I am held up with the brass knuckles, then I'll be putter. That's only if I just use words. But if I actually physically give up the guy's stuff, I give it to the mafia guy, so then I'm going to have to make restitution. And the reason is that because even if I'm saving my own skin, but I damage someone's property in the process of saving my own skin, I still have to make restitution to the person who I've damaged. And furthermore, when you say that a person is being compelled, it's because the guy's got this brass knuckles and he's going to really, really give it to me. But avolo ones mama. But if it's just financial compulsion, that's not called compulsion. And this last point, that if a person is under financial compulsion, that's not called compulsion, right? To the point where he can exempt himself because he felt threatened, that's not so clear. That if a person felt he was going to be wiped out, there's an opinion of the Shach that says that if a person feels he's going to be completely wiped out and he wants to save himself from complete financial ruin by informing on someone else, sometimes he also will not be compelled to pay in that situation. Okay, so there's a lot of gray area, but the bottom line is that thankfully we don't live back then, right? Thankfully we don't have to work. These are concerns of people who live in the third world or who live in a place of lawlessness, which was largely the case before the mid 20th century. And so we have to be fortunate that we live in the times that we live.
Although, Rabbi, as we know, in many places in the world in the 20th century, situations were a lot worse. Thinking about Soviet Russia and Nazi Germany and all those situations.
Yeah. Right. So that's why I say until the middle of the 20th century.
And even maybe the Arab world now, if there's Jews left anywhere.
It's possible, although it's very, I don't think, I mean, maybe, I don't know.
Jews in Iran, probably the Jews in Iran are under threat.
Yeah. And the Syrian Jews were under threat until we got them out.
Yeah. All right. Have a good Shabbos, everybody. We'll see you, Mirza Hashem, on Tuesday.
Forget how grateful we should be to be in North America.
Yeah.
Anyway,
all right.
Have a good